Thank you for being here. I'm just going to go right in to open it up to questions. Any questions you may have?
Do you have any, coronavirus is clearly on a lot of people's minds now. Does the Senate have any contingency plans for coronavirus?
Well, I had a call last week with Gary Cox, the head of the health department, about Oklahoma's plans on it. We're looking at statutory language to make sure that in the case of an emergency that we're prepared statutorily. And then I have Senator McCourtney being the point person in the Senate on policy. Now, as far as internally into the Senate, staffing-wise, Ashley Kell, Chief of Staff, and Arnella Cargis will help line out that, but we don't have any concrete plans internally staff-wise yet, but we're working with the health department to come up with plans statutorily.
If there are quarantines, do you anticipate still meeting?
I don't anticipate that event. I don't anticipate that hypothetical, but we'll be prepared if we have to.
What policies could we be talking about in terms of coronavirus?
There's some statutory emergency powers granted to the governor and the legislature that we're just reviewing to make sure we're adequately prepared and that it fits this situation we need it. We've dealt with this in the past of getting our statute prepared for different health problems. We've never had to actually implement them, but we want to make sure that we're prepared in the event that we have to.
What would those policies look like?
Don't know yet. Just started the review process Friday, but we take it serious. We think we're well prepared. Oklahoma, I think, is very well prepared, but want to make sure that we don't leave any stone unturned.
Are you looking at supplemental funding for the health department? I know they're getting ready to open a lab to test for this.
Not at this point, but obviously that may be something we have to look at. If you listen to Vice President Pence and some of the briefings from the White House, they're talking about some money flowing down from the federal side to the state for that, but I don't know all the details on that yet. We're getting up to speed now.
Does this coronavirus scare, does it concern you at all in terms of, merging state health agencies? That, I don't know what could happen, but could the State Department be dealing with this and then also merging into other agencies at the same time?
We'll have to look at that as we're looking at the policy that the governor's put forth on trying to merge some entities. That's still pretty early in the process, so we'll be able to contemplate that as we move forward. Obviously, we'll want to make sure that we don't first do no harm, right?
Where does the merge stand between ODOT and the highway or the Turnpike Authority?
Well, it moved forward. I had to have Senator Stanislawski present it in committee last week. We did a committee substitute with a lot of input from the Department of Transportation and the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority, making sure that we protected the bondholders and making sure that we don't jeopardize any monies, federal grants on highways. And so we'll be hearing it on the floor here in the next couple of weeks.
What are the advantages to merging?
Just shared services. There's a lot of overlap on the duties and responsibilities of the two entities, and they already have a ton of shared services agreements, but this would be codifying that to make sure that we don't have duplication and make sure we maximize our resources.
Can you talk about Medicaid funding? Thompson has said that that bill on JCAB's agenda was dead and he's not going to bring it back up. What's the status? Are we still talking about the concept? Or?
Well, right now, I think what Senator Thompson said last week after the committee still stands, that we were at 3.25%, and that idea is not going to come to fruition right now. Obviously, we're still open to discussions, but that particular vehicle, that JCAB that we were hoping to pass out last week, is dead.
Is there any concern with the cost estimates being very low ball? I mean, because it's like, I think they're saying 180,000 will sign up, which is not even half the eligible population.
So the numbers that I'm looking at, there are 220,000 individuals eligible for the expansion population, and another 39,000 that would be potentially eligible under the woodworking under the old match of the state picking up about 33%. The 90-10 match, there's about 220,000 lives that would be eligible for that. You anticipate in the long run about 180,000 people actually signing up. In the first year, you anticipate 60%, so about 132,000 lives. If you look around the country, most states have underestimated the cost. So yes, that is a concern. But they've mostly underestimated at a mid 4,000s to mid 5,000s. And the cost has been upward to mid 6,000s. We were estimating on our funding plan 8,750 per life, so we felt like we had a pretty good cushion in there. But yes, obviously you want to get the estimate right.
Where are y'all getting your numbers from, the 220,000?
The consultants that the governor hired in the healthcare authority.
Is there any chance that you will be back in special session on this issue?
There's obviously a chance, probably not the Sooner Care 2.0 necessarily, but if the state question were to pass and we don't have a funding mechanism going out of session for that 802, if that were the scenario, that's a possibility. We've got to keep in mind, and we'll figure out a way to do that, but these chambers are going to be scaffolding from floor to ceiling, so that there will be a logistical issue on how we do it.
Has the governor told you that he wants the Sooner Care 2.0 plan funded by Friday?
Well, there was a timeline of trying to submit some paperwork in order to get people enrolled by date certain sometime in the summer. But obviously, if we were to do that, you'd have to have a JCAB today, and we don't have anything scheduled.
What paperwork are we talking about?
The paperwork for the state plan amendment stuff.
So basically, Sooner Care 2.0 is not going to get funded.
Well, I don't know. We'll see what the governor comes up with. We came up with a funding plan that was viable, and that didn't come to fruition. So we'll see where the governor goes from here.
What was the holdup on that?
Just a disagreement on the.
Was it the rate or was it managed care?
In my belief, most of the fights over the rate have been a proxy war on managed care, but the discussion was about the rate.
So the governor has a very ambitious timeline. Let's get 180,000 people enrolled in July on Medicaid under Sooner Care 2.0. Right. Do you think that that's a realistic goal? Because obviously it probably has to be funded first.
Yeah, so I applaud the governor's efforts to try to come up with some alternative to something being enshrined in the Constitution. I don't think there's ever been a plan to have 180,000 day one. You anticipate 60% enrolling that are eligible in that first year. That's where I came up with that 132,000 number. Now that's on the expansion population, so the 90-10, and then you have the 39,000 people who would be eligible through the woodworking of those who are currently eligible that just aren't enrolled. So I don't think we're looking at 180,000 the first year. I think his plan, I don't know a lot of the details of the plan, to be honest with you. So to anticipate the viability or lack thereof is really hard to say at this point.
Isn't that a problem at this point, that you don't know? I mean, not from your perspective, but that the governor has not shared with you the details of his plan.
I would like to know more details. So would my caucus.
And so, do you feel like that Sooner Care 2.0 could be funded by July 1 and in place by July 1, or is that too ambitious of a deadline?
I think that's a question for the governor and his staff on just the process of how does CMS work. Prior to him going to DC and meeting with Seema Verna and standing up at the podium, I believed that the timing was too ambitious then, because I wasn't sure if there's been no state plan amendment or state waiver amendment. So the state plan amendment is just, you can expand or not. And then the state waiver amendment normally takes a longer process, anywhere from 6 to 18 months, and I've never seen 6 months in any of the examples I've looked at. But the way they've changed the healthy adults waiver, where it's almost a template of checking boxes, and the fact that the Seema Verna was standing next to him saying, yes, we like it, it assuaged my concerns at that time on the timing. As far as our caucus, we've tried to separate the delivery mechanism from the funding mechanism to try to get the governor the revenue he needs to be able to fund it, and then work with him on the details moving forward and trying to keep that conversation separate.
Why keep them separate? That seems like they'd be very...
They're intertwined as far, but timing-wise, if you're trying to get a state plan amendment by a certain date, you needed to show that you could fund it. And then the waiver would be due later, sometime in April probably.
What do you think the rush is to try to get this up and running by July?
To show people that we can do it, and to show people that we can do it without it being in the Constitution and rigid and inflexible.
Are you confident you can?
It's the governor's plan, so you need to ask that of the governor. We were trying to assist and be helpful to the governor, and have come up with a couple funding solutions that just haven't been universally accepted
If
yet.
you did have to come back in special session to fund the state question should it pass, where are your meeting location options?
Well, I think we could, that's a good question. I don't know. I was about to, off the top of my head, say we would have meeting space here, but I think a lot of our meeting space is going to be worked on. So that's a very valid question that I don't know the answer to right now.
Mr. Pro Tem, can you just quickly, if you had your druthers or your caucus did, what might managed care look like? What would you consider to be a palatable and feasible population?
Well, that's assuming that we go to managed care. I think the options are wide open at this point.
Do you support managed care?
In certain circumstances, you know, as we've voted on it in the past, we've had a couple vehicles of pilot program on age, blind, and disabled that I supported. But we need to look. Other states, there's 41 states that have done managed care in some form, and there's been some successes and some failures. But as far as what I understand of the governor's plan is that it would only impact those new lives, not the existing Medicaid population. And we need to look and see, hey, has it worked in other states that deal with a similar population? There are certain people within my caucus that prefer the fee-for-service, certain people who really think managed care is a good way to control better health outcomes. And I'm still looking and researching to see what the best delivery model is. I think it would be a mistake for the legislature to dictate every part of the delivery method and prescribe it. I think some of that needs to be given over and enshrined in RFPs and that type of stuff as we move forward to try to see what ideas are out in the private sector that could help us find a solution.
You keep calling this the governor's plan. Does the Senate have no buy-in on this?
We were obviously trying to find funding, so we were supportive of trying to come up with a funding solution, and then we were going to move on to the delivery model discussion after that, but that hasn't worked thus far.
So are you not trying to find funding anymore? You said we were trying to find funding.
We've given our funding options, and we're waiting to see if there's other alternatives that are raised. We've given our best shot at that.
On the funding, the shop fee wasn't going to cover the whole thing.
Correct.
You're talking about TSET. I think shop fee plus TSET didn't get you there, so what's the other option?
So there's some other funding mechanisms. When you do expand, part of the DOC population becomes a little cheaper because if they were eligible for Medicaid prior to going behind the bars, if you expand, you get some money there. Mental health and substance abuse services would draw in some money.
What's the population of those two agencies?
I'm sorry?
What are the populations you're talking about with DOC and mental health where you do it?
Well, we're still looking at some of those, but there was a number we could put on those. I don't have that off the top of my head, but that you could decrease appropriations for that purpose to put toward this because they would be served under the expansion. There were a couple other smaller ones that I can't remember, but and then Insure Oklahoma, if you do expand, that frees up about 30 million thereabouts. It's in the 30s.
Insure Oklahoma?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
What did I say?
What you said, Insure Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So you would be getting rid of it essentially, right?
If you expanded, yeah.
Yeah.
But, let's say S802, let's say, well, two parts of this. Either the governor's plan gets some details and there's agreement. Is shop fee still viable at that point for part of it? And then secondly, let's say there is no deal on Senior Care 2.0, 802 passes, is shop fee still part of that?
Yeah, I think shop fee is a part of discussion in anything you're talking in this arena. Shop currently is assessed at 2.3%. It's got a cap at 4%. And so what the JCAB bill did was put 0.95% dedicated toward the Senior Care 2.0 plan, expansion plan. And then you still had, so you had the 2.3 plus the 0.925. And so you had the 325 plan. And then that would allow you to have a float of 3/4 of a point in case our FMAP dollars went down, that the hospitals wouldn't, we could raise that 2.3 to be able to offset a FMAP decrease. We kind of know in the future for 2 years what our FMAP's going to be, but you don't know after that. and Oklahoma typically lags behind. When we're doing well, we get a higher FMAP, and we're doing poorly, we get lower, which is completely contrary to what the federal design was on that originally. But we're a little bit of an anomaly being a commodities-based economy.
The House Rules Committee passed a COLA bill the other day. It's non-OPLA compliant. It actually defines itself as a non-fiscal retirement bill. Is the Senate on board for that?
So the Senate, we have yet to take a position. Greg Treat has talked to the Speaker and told him that I'm supportive of the concept. I've got to look at the details. But the stair-stepped approach of having 0 to 1 years being 0 and 2 to 5, 2 and then 4 beyond that, some kind of stair-step rather than an across the board is a concept that I appreciate. I want to make sure that we look at the pension fund balance post last week's really bad market performance to make sure that we're not jeopardizing anything moving forward. But yes, I have communicated my support for that concept in that bill. I need to look at the details of the actual language.
Where do you think your caucus is going to come in on that?
I don't know yet. We were very adamant last year that we followed OPLA, and I was very adamant on that because I was here in 2011 and 2012 when we made most of those reforms, which were hard-fought reforms that have put us in a much better spot. And we're spending over $500 million on off-the-top money just to shore up previous mismanagement of those funds. So I want to make sure we don't put ourselves on a trajectory of going back to where we came from. But I also understand the retiree who is sitting on a fixed pension and hasn't seen an increase in a while.
Two other quick topics. We're talking about health, tobacco use, smoking rates, always a factor in costs and just health outcomes. House has a bill, Pro Tem Wright, would change the Clean Indoor Air Act. Have you had any thoughts about that? If it made it over here, were there any discussions about a similar vehicle potentially in the Senate?
I have not seen that bill or heard much about it, so I'll have to look at it.
Lastly, you're wearing your Langston tie. Thoughts about higher education this session? That hasn't really been a hot issue, but 28 million new last year. Concurrent enrollment is an issue that two-year schools would like to see. Any thoughts as a caucus about? Well,
we're very supportive of concurrent enrollment, trying to look at seeing if we can push it down to the junior year. I know there's a bill floating out saying that like OU, OSU can't charge more than a 2-year. There's a set fee. I'm interested in that. I want to make sure I understand it completely. But higher ed had some rough years out here when we had budget cuts, and I want to make sure that we look favorably, as favorable as we can upon higher ed. I think, as I said at one of the chamber meetings that I'm not sure if you were at or not, I think city or state chamber, I wish the higher ed were much more responsive to market demands and what jobs are needed. We need to have more engineers. We could fill those jobs. So I'm talking to higher ed, hopeful that we can be helpful this year.
Feel good about the reforms that Governor Fallon had asked for to be considered in terms of administrative consolidation. We've got 26 universities, 48 campuses. Do you feel?
Well, I need to go back and look at a lot of that. I talked at the time to former state senator, president at Southeastern at the time, Sean Burge, a lot during the middle of that. And there needed to be some modernization, but I haven't seen the implementation of it yet. I'd be intrigued to see what the university officials are thinking about that.
What are the big bills this week, Sam?
I don't know. That's a good question for.
We're going to vote on bills, Pro Tem.
Oh, we are.
You need to get out.
Okay. Senator David I've delegated that to her. I have some input in it, but I don't think there's anything uber controversial that we'll see this week that I'm aware of at this point.
Can I work in one last one? On higher ed, obviously Governor Stitt voiced his unhappiness with Chancellor Johnson and Chancellor Johnson's leaving this year. Have there been any discussions about changing up the hierarchy or the administration system for higher ed and making it more accountable to the legislature or the governor?
There have been some discussions, but nothing that has that I've seen advance in legislation thus far. All right. Thank you.